this was the starting point for the work. It's an image that I had in my digital library. By the way, my library was almost instantly digital. When I was, I think, between age 18 and age 25, I dreamt of only having a digital library and trashing all the paintings, all the lithographs, all the drawings, and just having a disc with my life on it. That was my biggest dream. And that thing was in it it was a scan that I must have made many years ago. And I really don't know what the origin is of the images. So I'm really a thief who loves to steal, and then I throw the origin of the image away. Initially out of laziness, but later I threw away the origins or the credits of images because I was afraid that would affect me too much forever, so to say, that I wouldn't be able to give the image a second chance. And I was looking for a scream which would be louder than silence. So remember I spoke about silence, but the work is actually showing a scream. The little young fellow is screaming his lungs out. And yeah, these are some of the early sketches that I made. And these were later sketches towards the end of the production. And then this is source material found on the internet, of course. And it was probably, you know, it's so strange when you have an idea. It's never a one thing. It may feel incomplete. Of course it feels incomplete, otherwise you wouldn't have to go after the idea. But it's as if it's many things coming together, but they don't provide a solution for anything. They're not the solution. And when I have an idea, in this case, I realized that the volume of the confetti was going to carry the work. And that this volume was going to carry my resistance to, you know, profound 3D, and my resistance to computing. I'm really collaborating with my enemy. I hate computing, but I'm working with it quite deeply in order to try to subvert it. And the thing is, when you're blind, we spoke about dark optics. Imagine you're blind, but you're a photographer. You only have your eyes that are gone and your memory to rely upon. And we know perception is a matter of not eyes, but of memory. And that the eyes are merely a gateway to your perception. But imagine if you don't have the eyes anymore. You're entirely relying on this situation of being a mole underground. You're not digging your way out, but you're trying to recall situations that will almost change your chemical substance, your bodily substance. Simple situations. Not fear, not sex. This is an easy one. Very marketable. Because, well, it's always there. If you're healthy. But a different type of substance. A substance that is not quite clear, which is rather digital materiality. Which is something between living time, living duration, meaning breathing, inhaling, the passage of time, getting older, circadian time, and the other kind of information, which is 3D space, which is such an overdefined space. So the difficulty is when you're completely blind, how do you find your way back to perception? How do you find your way back to those materials that no longer exist for you in the outside world, because you don't have an outside world, you're blind. You can remember one, and you might feel one. Somebody might speak to you, and you might imagine one. But nevertheless, that material gets a substance. That's the whole thing about profound digitization, that it becomes a substance on its own. It's not exactly matrix. There's no pill. There's nothing where your body is laid in a liquid, kept, and your brain lives in an imaginary or produced world. That's a thing of the 90s. It is the fascinating aspect of digital matter is that it really relies upon physical memory. It relies upon living trauma, maybe, but that's very sexy. Trauma is really not my subject matter. My subject matter would really be the background. Those parts of lived experience that you do not immediately notice and that have no role as an actor. And then this is how it's made. It's made using a system or a rig of 45 digital cameras that work together with a computer system that essentially distills out of the data, out of the digital photographs, a 3D model. By now it's a common practice. And I believe in 25 years' time it will be so common that this discourse will not make a lot of sense anymore, or at least not on that level. And then this is a person in the becoming. And I never really like this Cartesian divide or this Cartesian substance divide very much. When I work in computing, in between computing and photography, it is always trying to find my way out of the mind-body dualism, which is, by the way, the problem of Matrix. It's a mind-body dualism. It doesn't really get away from it. And to try to find what in digital environment is a real residue, one which you can live with, breathe with, and understand with. For the confetti piece, I used around 80 different figurants, people we knew, well off usually, and that would come into this abstract situation. This is my studio. The blue screen is not really working. It's just there to filter out certain information and to help the cameras recognizing one another. Because that what you need to do is you have, with all those cameras, they need to know their place geographically in relation to one another. As long as the cameras do not recognize their relation towards one another, they just produce blur. They produce a kind of soup which is unintelligible. That's the little fellow we used. He's, by the way, this is a thing I kind of enjoy doing, venturing into cliches like that. He's the only black little fellow together with his parents in an otherwise completely white Anglo-Saxon group. And a lot of people tried to convince me to drop this aspect of the work when I talked to them, especially Americans. When I spoke to them about it, they said it produced racial divide and didn't really do anything else. But I have a tendency of doing exactly the opposite. When I can get it in trouble, try to get in trouble. And this is the source material being used. These are random images, in fact. This is not prepared material. That's his dad. His dad is used to lead your gaze towards him, because you're essentially in a joyous situation, a vertical situation. But at one point, the gaze needs to be led towards the boy, which is really kind of hidden in the scene. And he's the first to suspect, to lead us towards something which is going not quite right. These are images of how we built or rebuilt Bad Bentheim. Yeah, that's all very abstract. I have little control myself over this, but I essentially, through the, remember, concept, conversation, and consensus, through the conversations, we came to agree with my studio that Bad Bentheim was actually a kind of ideal situation, and that we would make a neo-Gothic looking space out of it. And I think sometimes that the 3D pictorial system goes back to an excitement which must have been very present in early oil painting or oil panel painting, where you could achieve a depth and a precision through various semi-transparent layers, which had never been achieved before. And isn't it true that when you have an image, any image, you always have two aspects which are there, regardless of what kind of image you have? Whether it is a marble sculpture, a photograph, a Van Eyck painting, or anything else, is you have a dialectic between nearness. Some would say it's immersion, but I disagree with the immersion, because immersion means matrix. Immersion means liquid, being thrown into liquid and surrendering yourself to it. That's what immersion does. Immersive cinema does that. Gaming, 3D glasses. But don't forget, you're in Cartesian space, so you're being quite fooled with the immersive aspect. So nearness is the first sort of always there when you have an image. It's different aspects of nearness. You just always want to be close. And you could say, yeah, fine, pornography does that for me. It's a form of nearness of something else. But it's the artist negotiating a certain distance between you and an abstract object. And the second aspect that's always there, otherwise you don't have an image, is perplexion. You're perplexed. You're not overwhelmed, but a part of your senses cannot exactly cope with the technology that's being used. So those two aspects are always present in an image. And of course, being perplexed is the godsend territory of the 3D pictorial universe, because it promises that you can go anywhere. It doesn't actually show you behind the screens, but it says there's an infinite depth to everything that you see. But naturally, the engineers know better. And this is a way, I just love this for simply kitsch, sort of modernist pattern of recognition of the computer, is that this is a wall being built, a stone wall, and this is the computer trying to cope with what we fed it. That's not quite the result, but it's an in-between stage. And in a moment I will speak about Olympia, and the stones will come back as a subject matter. And there I treat the stones quite differently, far more literal. Isn't it juicy how computers make trash out of sort of modern aesthetics? I really have no idea where this comes from, but this was found in my digital archive. So what I didn't tell is that secretly I have a program running in every computer in my studio which records what people are doing. So this gives for some very nice information and entertaining images sometimes. That's about bend time while it's being cut up or being stitched back together. This is the layers of confetti. There were 16 layers of confetti falling down. Well, that's the most brutal initial rendering of the scene. And then, if I get it right, I need to push another button now. Oh yeah, this is a rendering of dust, which we did to simulate falling confetti. So it was done based upon that. And I always find it strange that when I speak about this work in progress stuff, it's as if somebody would have me eating dust. It doesn't feel very tasty. It doesn't kind of feel accomplished as a matter. And I find it fascinating in digital matter is that you're always in between states. You're never in an accomplished state. But I promise you that all aspects of life are being exaggerated. Sweat, tears, you name it. Any kind of substance that maybe that we encounter in life have to be exaggerated in 3D. This is then when we replaced the dust particles with the confetti particles. These are some of my actors. That's just a joke. It's all of them together. And this is how I work towards the end when I stitch everything together. So I have a lot of prints, hundreds, and I try to make up the final edit. The final edit is conventional. I can really do it a day before the opening of the exhibition. Sometimes did it. In fact, I have to admit I mostly do it like that. I work technically towards the end, and the really difficult part is in the last 24 hours. This is my studio. Oh, and then these are some stills. You've seen them. So, do I have time to go on to Olympia? Or are you all bored and want to go home?